And let's finish up our point creation techniques with a method called Cartesian coordinate entry. First we'll do it with dynamic input on, and then we'll do it with dynamic input off. If I go to, because I toggled on my dynamic input toggle, I can pick it and turn dynamic input back on. And now when I draw a line, I can pick a point and go. And by default, AutoCAD kicks us into this polar coordinate entry mode. But sometimes I know that I want to come over 1 unit and up 3/4 of a unit or something like that. I want to create the next point in terms of X and Y rather than in terms of distance and angle. To do that, we just kind of have to change AutoCAD's mind. Let's go over 1. So I'll type in a 1, and I'm typing it into the distance box, but now I'm going to separate the distance in the X direction from the distance in the Y direction with a comma. And if I do the comma key, AutoCAD says, oh, I know what you're doing, so I'm going to get out of that polar mode and I'm going to go into an X value, comma, Y value. And by hitting the comma key, you can see that we locked in the 1 value, and now I can give it a 0.75, and I'll hit enter. And what happened was that I went over 1 unit and up 3/4 of a unit to create that next point. If I wanted to go over this way, let's say I wanted to go over 2 and down 0.5, because I'm going to the left, I got to go -2, comma, and because I'm going down, I got to go negative, so I'll go down 0.5. I think that's what I said, and I hit enter, and you can see from that last point, I went down, excuse me, I went over and down. And if you look at how AutoCAD entered that information, it kind of took care of typing the @ symbol for us. So when we're in dynamic input, it's always related to the last point. We'll talk more about that in just a second. What I'm going to do now is just how that would happen with dynamic input off, in case you choose to work that way. And I'll draw a line, and I'll just pick a point, and let's say I want to go 2 in the X direction, comma, and let's go downwards, -1 in the Y direction. And oh, look what happened. Now I'm zooming out with my wheel on my mouse. You can see what the heck happened here. Okay, I'm going to hit enter to get out of the line command. If you look at the way we entered these values, now we didn't type in the @ symbol. When dynamic input is turned on and we're using it, the @ symbol gets typed in automatically for us. Since we didn't type in the @ symbol, what the heck did happen? Well, then our coordinates that we enter become what we call absolute. They're related to the 0, 0 point. This little icon that's on the screen is showing us exactly where the 0, 0 point in our drawing is. And what happened was this point got created 2 units over and 1 unit down from the 0, 0 point. And that's why I ended up with kind of a weird line. But the point got created exactly how it was supposed to, because it was absolute. I'm going to go ahead and just draw another line, and I'll do what I was talking about, but now I'll go from the last point, go 2 units in the X direction, comma, -1 unit in the Y direction, and now it went from that last point over 2 and down 1. So that is the difference between absolute coordinates and relative coordinates. Let's say I'm going to erase these 2 lines just to keep it a little clean. Not that we're doing anything all that fantastic here anyway. But now let's turn on dynamic input, and let's say, geez, you know what? I don't know why, but I do want to go 2 over and 1 down from the 0, 0 point in the drawing. By default, when we have dynamic input turned on, it's going to be relative to the last point. AutoCAD will automatically type in the @ symbol for us. When dynamic input is off, we have to type in the @ symbol to make it relative. Otherwise, it'll be absolute. How do we make it be absolute when we're using polar coordinates? We make it absolute, when we're using dynamic input. We make it absolute with the pound symbol, or hashtag, I guess many people say nowadays. But if I go pound 2, comma, -1, now I'm saying don't go from the last point. Go from the 0, 0 point, 2 over and 1 down, and it creates that point in the exact same spot. All right? Now, what controls the fact that dynamic input defaults to polar coordinate entry method and defaults also to relative instead of absolute? That makes the most sense in my world. I've been using AutoCAD for way too many years, and I got tired of typing in the @ symbol. Forever and ever we had to type in the @ symbol when we're always trying to draw in relationship to the last point. We're rarely trying to create a point that is in reference to 0, 0. But if we wanted to, how do we affect that? The way we control what dynamic input defaults to is we just go down here to any one of these buttons, okay? And if you remember, if I right click on any one of them and pick what it asks me for, whoops, let's go on this one instead, because those were what we were dealing with earlier. Tracking settings. Even though I'm picking tracking settings, I'm not doing anything with tracking settings, but this pick brings up that drafting settings dialog, and it makes the polar tracking tab active. All I got to do is go over here to dynamic input and talk about the pointer input settings. If I pick this, you will see that for second and next points always default to polar format and always default to relative coordinates. So it'll take care of typing in the @ symbol for us because we got relative picked, and it will always default to polar because we have polar picked. If you work in relationship to 0, 0 and you work more closely with X and Y coordinates than distances and angles, by all means pick Cartesian coordinates and pick absolute. Or if you deal in Cartesian coordinates in relationship to the last point, leave it at relative, but go ahead and pick Cartesian coordinates. For me, polar input and relative coordinates makes the most sense, so I'm going to leave it set that way. And that's that.